For the last couple weeks, we've been talking about factoring, and today we're going to go just a little bit deeper. I'm going to show you a couple shortcuts, and then I'm going to show you just one other way that you can factor. So everybody needs to make sure that they have this piece of paper on their desk and that they have a highlighter or something colored that they can write on if we have any important notes or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my title, make that a little bit bigger. And we're going to just initially review. It says, let's review. Always ask yourself what when you have to factor. What is the very first thing you should always ask yourself? Is there a GCF? This should always be the very first thing you always try to do, because taking out a GCF is the easiest way to factor because you can do it quickly in your head. So I'm going to do number one with you. So first thing you ask yourself, is there a GCF? Yes. What is it? 4. So I'm going to take out 4. So I'm left with x squared minus 2x minus 3. Am I done? No. I now have to ask myself, well, can I factor the leftovers? So factoring the leftovers, can I do it quickly or do I have to factor by grouping? Well, I can do it quickly because there's no coefficient next to x squared. So factors of negative 3 that make negative 2. Negative 3 and positive 1. And then that GCF 4 has to go on the outside. Notice on this problem I'm not splitting them up and solving for x because I don't have an equal sign in this problem. All I'm doing is factoring. So factoring means I'm putting it in the 2 parentheses and then I'm stopping. So I want everybody to pause this video and I want you to practice these 6 problems on your own. When you have the majority of them done, go ahead and unpause the video and we will go over it together. But don't unpause it until everybody has made a conscious attempt on all 6 of these problems. So on this next one, 11v squared is my GCF. I'm left with 4v minus 1. There's nothing else I can do. So that's my answer on number 2. Number 3, there is a GCF, which is 3x. So x squared plus 3x minus 4. So I'm now going to factor it a little bit more. I get x plus 4, and I get x minus 1. If I forget my GCF, I'm losing points, so just be careful. Next one. My GCF is 7mg. But because my leading coefficient is negative, my GCF is going to be negative. So when I take that out, I'm left with 5m plus 3g cubed. And there's nothing else I can do, so I'm done. Number 5, you might want to put a star by, because number 5, everybody gets really scared by this because there's multiple variables. And notice, yeah, number 4 had multiple variables, but notice number 5, I don't have a GCF. So you always get scared. So I'm going to rewrite this a little bit better. I'm just going to do this. 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. If I just had that problem, could I factor it? Well, sure. I'd have to factor by grouping, so I get negative 12. Factors in negative 12 that make 4, 6, and negative 2. So I have 2x squared plus 6x minus 2x minus 6. So now I'm going to cut it in half. Take out a GCF on each side. So I'm left 2x is left with x plus 3. And on this side, my GCF is negative 2. I'm left with x minus 3. So I have, oh, sorry, that's supposed to be x plus 3. So I'm left with x plus 3. Oh, and I just noticed something totally terrible that I just did in this problem. Hopefully you're sitting here yelling at me on the computer screen right now. What was the thing that I screwed up on, ladies and gentlemen? There was a GCF on this problem. So if I, again, just pretend the y value is not there, and I just do this, oops, just do that. First thing I'm going to do is take out a GCF. I'm now going to factor x plus 3, x minus 1, right? But notice x times x made x squared, which then the middle term was just x, and then I had nothing. So when I go through this and I put a y squared here and a y here, all that means is that my last term gets a y in each of my parentheses. So when you have the variables like this, when it's always the front is x squared, the back is squared, and then the middle has the singular of each, it's just going to be one is in the front and for the first term and the other one is in the back with the second term. Those are common problems because we like to scare you on those. So be careful, and hopefully you didn't mess up like I did without taking the GCF. So let's now talk about the next one, number 6. 4f squared plus 20f plus 25. All right, there's no GCF, so now I really have to factor by grouping. I got 100, and then I get 10 and 10. So 4f squared plus 10f plus 10f plus 25. I'm going to erase that so I have more room. So now I'm going to split up and find the GCF. So I have 2f, which is 2f plus 5. And over here, I have a GCF of 5, which is 2f plus 5. So I have 2f plus 5, and then I have 2f plus 5, which I could just write 2f plus 5 squared and be done. So hopefully all of that was a review. Now I want to talk about difference of squares. So let me erase some of this so I have some space. Alright, and now let me scroll. Difference of squares. If you preview these problems, you notice that the middle term is missing. So whenever the middle term is missing, you always have to, think about, okay, what two numbers multiply up to the last number but add up to equal 0. There's actually a quicker way to do this. Difference of squares. So difference of squares is when the middle term is missing. My trick, one parenthesis is positive, the other is negative. Then square root both terms to get answer. So instead of having to think about it, when I have a difference of squares, it just means my middle term is missing. My middle term equals 0. So my trick is that one parenthesis is going to be positive, the other parenthesis is going to be negative, and then I'm going to just square root both of my terms to get an answer. So if I look at this first example, my middle term is missing, so I'm just going to do my double parentheses. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative, and it's always going to be xx. I'm just going to square root the numbers. Well, the square root of x squared is x and x, which is how I got this and this. What's the square root of 16? 4. So 4 and 4, and I'm done. Come over here, let's look at number 2. My middle term is missing, so it's always plus and minus. I'm now going to square root each term. So 9x squared. If I square root 9x squared, well, the square root of 9 is 3, and then x squared is just xx. So I have 3x and 3x on the first term. If I look on my second term, 25, what's the square root of 25? 5 and 5. I'm done. Number 2. No, I can't count. How about number 3? Number 3, notice they're not perfect squares. So what do you suggest that I do? Well, hey, there's a GCF. So I'm going to take that out. So what's my GCF? -2, So I'm left with x squared minus 1. So, double parenthesis, 1 plus 1 minus, square root both terms. X squared is just going to be x and x. The square root of 1 is just 1. And I'm done. So still, I'm always making sure there's not a GCF. If there is a GCF, I'm taking it out first, and then I am doing the difference of squares. Another little friendly tip that you might want to write down, this only works when my last term is negative. So if I just write it down here, this only works when last term is negative. So just kind of keep that in mind as we are progressing. So I want you to pause this video and I want you to try, wow, these are totally numbered horribly. I want you to try 4, 7, and 8 for me, please. Try the next 3. When you finish those 3 problems, go ahead and unpause this video and then I'll go over it. So if I go ahead and look at this number 4, well, there's a GCF, there's 4. So I'm left with 25m squared minus 4n squared. So, okay, 1 positive, 1 negative, square root both. 5m and 5m, 2n and 2n. And 4 goes on the outside, and I'm done. If I look at the next one, I have a 4 as a GCF, so d squared minus 9c squared. So, alright, double parentheses, 1 positive, 1 negative, dd, and then I'm left with 3c and 3c, and I'm done. If I squeeze in this last one, I can't erase that because it doesn't want me to. So I have a GCF, I'm just going to come right here. I have a GCF of 3, v squared minus 9. So I have v plus 3 and v minus 3, and I'm done. So difference of squares, you can think about it where the middle term is 0 and think about it that way, or you can just memorize these quick steps to make you more successful at it. Let's now talk about factoring cubes. This is new. We haven't ever factored a cube before. Factoring cubes. Factoring cubes, I have steps to solve. I'm just going to say steps to factor. Step 1, cube root each term to get first parenthesis. Step 2. Step 2 has a lot to write, and because my handwriting's awful on this thing, I'm going to put step 2 down here. So step 2, I'm just going to kind of put it down here. Step 2, apply SOPs. SOPs. The S in SOPs, square first term. The O in SOPs is do the opposite sign of what's in the problem. The P in SOPs is I'm going to take the product of both terms. The other P in SOPs is the next sign is going to be positive. And the S in SOPs is I'm going to square second term. So when I have a cube and I have to factor it, I have to do SOPs. So step 1 is I'm going to cube root each term to get my first parenthesis. And then I'm going to use my first parenthesis to get my second parenthesis by applying SOPs. Square the first term, make the sign the opposite, take the product of both terms, make it positive, square the second term. these values here get you second parenthesis. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at this. So if I look at this problem right here, c cubed plus 27, notice I don't have a GCF. So because it's cubed, I have to apply SOPs. So how I apply SOPs is step one, I'm going to square root each term to get my first parenthesis. So what's the cube root of c cubed? Well, it's just c. And then since this is plus, it's plus. What's the cube root of 27? If you don't know how to do cube roots, your calculator, you're going to hit the math button, which is right underneath the alpha button, and then you're going to press the number 4. And then you're going to type in 27, and you should get 3. So step 1, cube root each term to get first parenthesis. I cube rooted c cubed to get c. I cube rooted 27 to get 3. So now I'm going to apply SOPs. So SOPs, I'm going to take my first term and I'm going to square it. So if I take c and I square it, that becomes c squared. The O in SOPs means I'm going to make the opposite sign. So since this sign is positive, it's now going to be the opposite, which is negative. The first P is I'm going to take the product of both terms. So I'm going to take the product means multiply. I'm going to multiply c and 3 together. What's c times 3? Well, that's 3c. The other P in SOPs is I'm going to make a positive now. So now I'm going to have a plus. And then the S is I'm going to square the second term. So my second term is 3. So if I square 3, I get 9. And I'm done. Let's try another one. H cubed minus 125. I know I have to do SOPs because I don't have a GCF and I don't know any other way to factor a cube. So step 1, cube root each term to get the first parenthesis. So h cubed is h minus, because it's minus, the cube root of 125. So I would hit math, I'd then hit number 4, I would then type 125 and hit enter, I would get 5. So now I'm going to apply SOPs. So if I just open my parenthesis. So S, square the first term. So my first term is h, square it, it becomes h squared. O is the opposite sign, so since my sign in my parentheses is negative, it's now going to be positive. The P is the product of both terms, so I got to multiply these together. H times 5, 5h. The other P means it's going to be positive. And then the S, I'm going to square the second term. So my second term is 5, so 5 squared is 25. Let's do the next one, because there's nothing else I can do. Sometimes you can factor this a little bit further, so you might want to check if you can factor, but I'm being kind, I'm telling you you can't. Let's do the next one, number 3. So, I don't have a GCF, so I have to do SOPs. So I'm going to cube root both of these. So the cube root of 8 is 2, and then n, and then plus, because it's plus. What's the cube root of 1? 1. So now I'm going to apply SOPs. I'm going to square the first term. So my first term is 2n squared. Is 2n. So I'm going to square it. So I got to square 2 and I got to square n. So 2 squared is 4, n squared is n squared. Now I'm going to do the opposite sign. So since it's positive, it's going to become negative. I'm now going to take the product of these two. So 2n times 1 is 2n. The other p, I'm going to make it positive. And then the s, I'm going to square my second term, which becomes 1. Let's do number 4. Notice number 4. What do you notice? Was the very first thing you should probably notice about it? Well, there's a GCF, so take it out. 2 is my GCF. I'm still left with x cubed plus 8. So, okay, now I got to apply SOPs on this. I have x plus 2 because the cube root of 8 is 2. I'm now going to apply SOPs. square my first term. So x squared. My sign becomes opposite, so negative. I'm now going to take the product of these two, so 2x, then positive, and then I'm going to take my last term and I'm going to square it, which becomes 4. So hopefully you're all doing okay. I want you to go ahead and pause this video and try 5 and 6 on your own, and then unpause it and I'll go over them. Alright, so if I go ahead, my answer is going to be 2k minus 1 times 4k squared plus 2k plus 1. On the last one, I have a GCF, so I'm going to take that out. 81 divided by 3 is what? 27. So I'm left with w minus 3, and then w squared plus 3w plus 9. Hopefully you can read my chicken scratch. So hopefully everybody's okay with this. So go ahead and flip your paper for me, please. Factor by grouping. We've already talked about factor by grouping instead of doing slide and divide. But sometimes we have to factor by grouping if I give you 4 terms already. So factor by grouping is used when the problem starts out with 4 terms. When the problem starts out with 4 terms, all I do is factor by grouping. And it's the exact same way. It's just, instead of me having to find those 4 terms to split it in half, it's already halfway done for me. So I have 4 terms. I'm going to split it down the middle. I'm going to find a GCF on this side. So the GCF is going to be 2g squared. So I'm left with 2g plus 5. And if I look on this side, my GCF is going to be 2. Oh, I lied. How about 3? And I'm left with 2g plus 5. Notice this parenthesis and that parenthesis match. If they don't match, it's wrong. So that becomes one answer, 2g plus 5. And my leftovers become my other answer, 2g squared plus 3. And I'm done. We're going to skip 2 for right now. We're going to jump to 3. So I have 4 terms. So since I have more than 3 terms, I have to factor by grouping. So I'm going to split it up, and I'm going to find the GCF on that side, which is 2x squared. So I'm left with 4x plus 1. On this side, my GCF is 3. So I'm left with 4x plus 1. So fortunately, my 2 parentheses match, so that's one answer. My other answer are the leftovers, 2x squared plus 3. Look at number 2. What should you always check first to see if there is a GCF? Notice number 2. Does it have a GCF? Yes. If I previewed to all of these problems, 4g cubed, 10g squared, 6g, and 15, there's no GCF, which is why I could immediately go ahead and factor by grouping. Same thing with number 3. But number 2, I do have a GCF. What is that GCF? Well, it's k. So now I'm going to do k cubed minus k squared plus k minus 1. So now I'm going to split up, factor by grouping. So I'm going to pretend there's like this wall here, so I'm only looking at these guys to factor by grouping. I'm left with k squared as my GCF, so k minus 1. And over here, my GCF is 1. I'm left with k minus 1. So one parenthesis is k minus 1. The other parenthesis is k squared plus 1. If I circle this, I'm losing a point because I got to put that k on the outside as well. So you might want to write a note to yourself. Take out GCF first. Go ahead and pause this video. Try number 4 on your own. When you finish, unpause this video and I'll go over the answer. So there's no GCF, so I'm going to factor by grouping. So 7p squared looks like it's my GCF. P plus 2. And the other side is p plus 2. So I'm left with 7p squared minus 3 and p plus 2. These are all the different ways you can factor. You can factor how we've been doing. You can factor with difference of squares. You can factor if you have a cube by doing SOPs, or you'd factor by grouping. The problems on this bottom half of this page are for you to practice. So I want everybody to practice these problems. When you finish these problems, you may check your answers with the person sitting next to you. You can go over them in class. But I'm also going to put all of the answers up here as well so you have them. So hopefully you can see all of the answers on the board for 1 through 8. I wanted to real quickly go over 9 with you. So if you're struggling, number 9, I'm going to do it with you. So I have to factor by grouping. So my GCF is W squared. I'm left with 3W plus 2. On the side, my GCF is negative 9. No. Yeah, negative 9. And I'm left with W, no, if I can calculate correctly, I'm left with 3W plus 2. So 3W plus 2 is 1, and W squared minus 9 is 1. If you circle this, you could technically lose points because W squared minus 9 is a difference of squares. So I could factor that a little bit more. I could say W plus 3 and W minus 3. And then I have 3W plus 2. So you always want to be really careful that you can't factor anything more if you stop. So let's see if there's anyone on here. But that looks like that's the only one. So this happens rarely, but it can happen, which is why I wanted to show it to you. So hopefully you're all okay with all the different types of factoring. Make sure you're asking questions if you are confused.